Hey guys, Jack here with the final episode of Miyagi Mornings for the week, Friday edition. This one is going to be on ponds. This comes from Cindy. Cindy asks the following question on the MeWe sticky that you can ask questions on, and you'll be highly likely to get an answer if you do it there. Cindy says, we are thinking about adding a pond to our property. It would have to be fairly small for us. So with it being small and knowing that you have several water systems in place, what would you recommend to someone that is putting in a small pond for backup water for their small livestock, tank or in ground? Would a small flock of ducks do well with either? Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. So when you say small, I don't really know what you mean. So, that's why I read this question exactly. So as I'm answering it and trying to make it more generalized so everybody benefits from this, you understand what I'm working with here. So small livestock. So I'm assuming that's like ducks, chickens, rabbits and stuff like that. Animals that you would most likely take a bucket and take the water to them in a backup situation. I do that all the time, and it's very useful for that. Tank or in ground. When you say tank or in ground, I'm not really sure if you mean something like a 300-gallon stock tank or if you mean something like a Miyagi pond, which this entire video series is named after, my big Miyagi ponds. Let's just kind of talk about what is the difference between a container full of water and a pond. A pond is developed as an ecosystem, to me anyway, or it's not a pond. And I have built pond systems out of tanks as small as, let's say, 300 gallons. And I think you can take a 300-gallon stock tank, and if you do the system right, put in filtration, etc., encourage biology, you can call it a pond. It's a very tiny pond. It's more accurately a very large outdoor aquarium. When I start thinking pond, I'm starting to think in the range of, 500 to 1,000 gallons and up. All of the ponds that I have, including my largest pond, which is a 12-foot by 12-foot Miyagi pond, are small. I mean, I would define all of those as small. And there's an issue. The smaller the pond, the less stable it is, the less oxygen battery you have, and the more likely it is to become stagnant or anaerobic and kill everything that lives in it if your biological and mechanical system of filtration fails. And any of these small ponds, I don't see a legitimate way, specifically in southern climates, to keep them going and keep them alive without the use of some sort of mechanical agitation like a pump or an air pump or something like that. I just don't. Somebody somewhere probably has done it, buried a bathtub in the forest and kept it under shade, and frogs live in it and minnows, and it's okay, and I guess maybe. But in general, the smaller, and this is something anybody that's ever kept fish in tanks, like the ones that are behind the camera that you can't see today. I have a 55-gallon tank with a big pleco just swimming around in there eating algae. The smaller the tank, the quicker things go wrong when things go wrong, right? The quicker they go really wrong. So we need to be thinking about backup systems. So back to the question, tank or in the ground. All things being equal, if you can put a pond in the ground, put the pond in the ground. I know you watch other videos with me, and I'm standing and I have this huge, basically wooden-lined tank behind me that we call a Miyagi pond. And you think, well, why, if that's the case, then why do you have that? Because I can't dig a hole. Without like dynamite and jackhammer attachments for large excavators, there is no way that I can get, the 3 foot of depth that I kind of see as the minimum depth requirement for that type of pond. I do have a lot of ponds that are built out of stock tanks and things like that. They're about 2 foot deep. They're also strategically located. You're not going to see me put a pond like that in a place where it doesn't get shade for a significant part of the day. Because if I do that, it's going to basically heat that water temperature to a point that nothing in there is going to survive, and your oxygen levels are going to seriously plummet. I'm actually going to be putting in a fairly large pond that I'm going to have to erect some sort of structure around through this year. I don't know exactly how I'm going to do it yet, to provide at least some shade at some time, even though I want that pond to grow for me aquatic vegetation. So I'm going to need some kind of dappled filtered shade. So the shallower the pond and the less water the pond, the more important it is that it be a shade-based pond. When it comes to keeping everything going, the simple answer is to use a pump. And a very simple, low-draw pump, I really like the brand called Active Aqua, is one of my favorite pumps. I'll put a link in the notes to one of them that I use. They make them in various sizes, from really little to fairly large. But if you're moving water and you're dropping it back in, however you're going to do that, you will most likely be able to keep your pond going. Again, as long as we don't let it get too hot, as long as we have enough depth, enough shade to deal with whatever climate that we're in. And those are the things that you need to be thinking about. And then you need to think, well, what do I want out of this? If you're running something like a small pond and the main use of it is growing aquatic vegetation and having a water feature and things like that, critters like Gambrusia, which are also known as mosquito fish, little minnows, they have an incredible tolerance. They tolerate water way warmer than you think it should be. They tolerate water that's dirty. You put goldfish in there, they're pretty hardy. And as you move, your fish requirements, your aquatic requirements. So my general rules would be, number one, if you can go on the ground, go on the ground. Your temperature is going to be much more stable that way than if you're above ground. Number two, keep animals out of your water features unless they're large enough to handle them. So in the type of stuff we're talking about today, a small flock of ducks in a pond that's 1,000 gallons, you have a skank pit. You really do. I mean, I'm like, this thing I'm talking about building over here kind of is sort of going to be, in a way, a skank pit. That's okay. It's designed to do something totally unique. It does not sound like what you want to do. Ducks have basically an ejection button, and they go in water and poop comes out. I mean, it's almost instantaneous, like 95% of the time. This is not good for a small aquatic system. If you were going to have a pond and you wanted to serve ducks with it somehow, then what you might do is create some sort of auto siphon or something like that comes down to a drinking vessel. So if we had an elevated pond, we could take something like a piece of 2-inch PVC, right? And we could basically create a siphon system, put a lid on it, where we can maybe close the bottom and fill it all the way up. This would be something you have to kind of figure out how to do, but it wouldn't be that hard. You put your lid back on it, and basically you have a siphon. And now when you open the bottom, water comes out to a point, or maybe you put little waterers, little cup waterers down there, where the animals can, kind of peck at it and drink water. And then that way it's always full. And then if you run a float valve to your pond, as they take water, the pond maintains it loses water through evaporation, etc. On that note, if you have a well system and you don't have chlorine in your water and you put in a pond, the type of pond we're talking about, smaller ponds, put a float valve in. One way or another, figure out how to do it, because that way, when you go on vacation for 2 weeks and you leave somebody behind to take care of things, your water level's not down this far when you come back, because it happens. And if something goes wrong and maybe water's discharging at a place that it's not supposed to, it's not good that water's running and discharging, but it's better than the alternative, which is your pond level goes way, way, way down. I would also say that if you have a well and you ever have a system fail and you can't immediately fix the pump in it or the aerator or whatever you're using, and you're not sure what to do, take your hose, put something on it to keep it weighted down so it goes all the way to the bottom. Put the hose all the way to the bottom of your pond, turns your water on until it begins to overflow, and then maybe back your flow down until it's a more stable rate of overflow. As long as you're not floating the neighbors out or anything like that, just let that go. Just let that go until you get a new pump in place. This is why I'm also going to say, if you're going to put a pond in and it's going to run on a pump, an air pump, a submersible pump, I don't care, whatever it's running on, if you don't have one that looks just like it on a shelf, brand new in a box, you're wrong. Because I don't care if Home Depot's down the road, and if they happen to have a pump in stock, if you come home and your pump has died, you probably don't have time to run down there before you have catastrophic failure in a small pond like this. In the summertime, certain times of the year, etc. So we need to be able to hot swap as quickly as possible. I'm also a big believer in multiple pumps in a system. So what I generally do is I run a continuously operating pump, and then I run some sort of an ebb and flow system. And that could be for aquaponics, and it can just be to grow reeds or something like that. It's just another level of filtration and aeration. That second pump I generally run on a very simple mechanical timer. I use ones from a company called Sentry. Just like the pump, I'll put a link in the video notes today. And it's a very simple timer that basically has a bunch of little pegs. And each peg is 15 minutes. If you push a peg down, it's on. If you leave the peg up, it's off. It's that simple. You don't have to have a freaking degree in programming from MIT to work it like some timers. And I set that, and I just go through, and every hour I push down one pin. And that means it runs for 15 minutes and shuts off for 45. And I run my ebb and flows so that when the pump's running, it runs. And you can look at some of my other videos. I'll find one and I'll link to it in the video notes here again. And when the pump stops, the water drains back through the pump itself. It sounds complicated. It's really dead simple. And what does this mean? This means that I have one pump in my system running 24/7, 365, and it is going to eventually wear out. It also means I have a pump in my system running 15/45 or 25% of the time. It should last on average compared to my other full-time pumps. If they're the same pump in the same situation, it should last 4 times as long. This means the odds of both of those pumps dying on the same day are very, very low, right? So I recommend that so either you do something like that, or you get something like a good aeration pump, just a bubbler, and you run that, and you run those independently. So if one dies, the other one's still running. Last but not least, I don't know if you've noticed, but occasionally, like you're sitting in your house and everything's happy, maybe the TV's going, the coffee's percolating or whatever, and then, for whatever reason, your power goes out. I highly recommend that everybody, especially in my audience, have backup power. But if you're going to have ponds, you may want to have backup power just for your ponds. And I'm all about backup batteries and stuff like that. And if you want to go through the rigmarole to do that, I think it's a great idea. It's something I want to incorporate more. I have myself extended, probably more so than I should, because it's an educational facility. I have multiple systems. It would be far better if I had just built one big system. And for most people, that's what I would advise. Maybe 2, because this new one is totally it's kind of an earth-changing or homestead-changing thing. If it works out the way I think it's going to, it may be something that empowers homesteaders all over the country, maybe all over the world, to produce more of their own feed. So it's a totally different thing. When we're talking about just a pond, every one you have is another one that can fail, another one that can have something go wrong. But what I've determined is my 3 main systems can at least run half the pump, no problem, with a $200 Dirty Hand Tools generator. It's about this big and sips gas. And I have all the cords for it and everything ready to go. And if the power goes out, I can take that little generator and sit at one spot, run those cords there, boom, and I've got at least half pump on all 3 of those main systems going. And then I can worry about the rest of my life. I really recommend that you have some method to run these pumps long term. You can get into multi-day blackouts. It happens. And if it happens in the winter, when your water temperature's low and you're not feeding your fish, it may not be a big deal at all. My ponds went 4 days with ice on top of them, with no pumps running, because the power went out and everything froze up. And I didn't lose a fish, because fish are not making a lot of waste when the water's that cold and they're not being fed. If that kind of thing happens in July, even my big pond has about 6 to 8 hours before you start seeing surface breathing activity from fish, and it's not going to be long after that where you're going to start having dead fish. And it's not going to be long after that where even the fish that are alive, if you get things running, most of the rest of the fish are not going to make it. So make sure you have that backup power. And again, those of you that are on wells, plumb in that flow valve, and if you ever end up in that catastrophic situation, just throw the hose in, turn the water on, and start moving water through. So think about your overflow. That's important in your design anyway. Hopefully this gets you thinking about doing this, and hopefully it doesn't talk anybody out of it. Things can go wrong with ponds. However, as you run your pond, you will learn more about how to do it in a way where you won't lose your biology. And if you properly design the biology, you're going to do really well. And I can't remember the guy's name now, but there's a British dude that's big on natural swimming pools and airlift pumps and things like that. He's a brilliant guy, and I'll make sure that his YouTube channel is in the video notes below. And the name is right on the tip of my tongue. And Jeff Lawton told me about him, and as soon as I stop this video, I'm sure it'll come to me. But I'll look it up, and I'll get it in the video notes for you. He has a lot of really cool ways he does things, and it'd be a good resource to check out as well. If you have any more questions about ponds, let me know. I feel like there might be follow-up to this one required. Take care, guys, and I will be back next week with another week full of Miyagi Mornings just for you.